Okay, so once again I'm using this bot cause I got stuff to do and I don't have time to record using my voice. And like the other post, this is a recap. Sorry for not posting any new parts. I'm planning on starting to write again, but I may put the current series on pause cause there's been a Naruto what if that's been on my mind, and to be honest it's all I've been thinking about, so I'll most likely do that then get back to doing the current series. Anyway, let's get started. Okay, to give some background, number 1 Aesir Silva is alive, number 2 Asta has a lot of mana but no attribute, number 3 Aesir has some sort of connection to the father at the church which would lead her to bring her children to the church every once in a while. Part 1. To start this off we are going to have an instant time skip to after the drunk man incident, and Emma say that they are now 7 during the past 7 years. Asta and Yuno have met the Silva family due to Aesir bring them to H. The Silva family have grown pretty fond on Asta and Yuno, but more so Asta, but most of them would never say that they are fond of him out loud. Asta has the dream of being the Wizard King still. Asta never developed a attribute, so Sister Lily begins to try and discourage Asta and his dream, not because she hates him but the fact that he doesn't have a attribute, and she is worried that if Asta keeps on dreaming of being the Wizard King he'll get himself killed. So she keeps trying to put him down and discourage him, and the other kids don't know about what she is doing, but since she is doing it, they would begin to do it too and tease him, but Aesir usually stop them. Once Asta leaves to go train until one day Sister Lily asks Aesir to do something Aesir never thought she would ask, that thing being to tell Asta that can't become a magic knight, let alone the Wizard King, and to give up. Because Asta sees Aesir as the idle magical knight, she kind, beautiful, understanding, she doesn't discriminate against commoners even though she is royalty. Asta wants to be like Aesir, as at first Aesir refuses, not wanting to hurt Asta as she sees Asta as a son, but eventually, and Sister Lily explains why she needs her to do it, that being Asta could die trying to be the Wizard King, at that she doesn't want that for Asta, and Aesir agrees that she doesn't want to see Asta die, so she said she'll do it. As we cut over to Asta, who has just gotten done with his training, as he would turn hearing footsteps and would look to see Aesir as he smiles say hi, but he would look confused as he sees the look on Aesir's face, as the look was once a disgust as she looks down, and a heavy breathing Asta as she would being to coldly say, give up, you don't have a attribute, you'll never become a magic knight, let alone the Wizard King, you attributeless peasant. You'll just get in the way of people with actual talent like Yuno or Noelle, as she turns and quickly leaves. And if Asta wasn't so devastated, he would have noticed the stream of tears that Aesir left behind. And you may be wondering about why this is able to affect us, since he is able to put up with the children at the church and Sister Lily, and the answer is Aesir is his idol, and she is the one who usually stopped the others from picking on him. But now she just told him that he can't be a magic knight, let alone a Wizard King. Back to Asta, who is just sitting there staring at where Aesir ran off to, as tears begin to flow down his face, as he just gets up and runs and keeps running until he trips, hitting his head multiple times, knocking himself out. We cut over to Aesir, who just made it back to the village, as everyone would see that she has puffy red eyes, but don't question it as she gets her family and leaves cause she feels like she is a horrible person based on how Asta I was looking at her, so I saw leaves. As we have a time skip to later when it turns dark, as everyone in the church is begin to worry about Asta, as Sister Lily has a horrible feeling but tries to shake it off, as we go back over to a dazed Asta as he just wakes up with a blurry vision but remembers what Aesir told him and tries his best to run, stumbling a bit. 7 minutes later we would see Asta walking bleeding from the head as he sees some blurred structure. As he doesn't question what the structure is, he just goes to it. As he gets closer he is able to make out an old temple that he would walk into. As he would go into the middle of the temple, as he sees an altar with 4 small statues of fairies on the sides. Asta would walk to the altar as he sits on top of it, since he doesn't know what it is, and gets knocked out as while he is asleep. A green, red, brown, and blue aura begins to leak from the statues and seep into Asta. We go over to Aesir just explained what she told to Asta to Nozel, Nabra, and Solid, who are extremely pissed off at their mother. As Nozel tells her in a firm tone that leaves no room for argument, "We'll go back tomorrow and you will give your sincerest apology to Asta, do you understand?" As Aesir looks down, shedding tears, nodding. At the church, everyone is freaking out, not knowing where Asta is, as the feeling sister Lily earlier shows up again as she unknowingly sheds a tear. Back to Asta as he just wakes up with this weird feeling as he sits up and hears 4 thuds and looks down to see 4 sleeping fairies as he would tilt his head in confusion. And he would begin to poke them as they would wake up. The 4 little fairies would look up seeing a confused Asta as he would ask, why are they so small and why do they have wings and why do they have such powerful magic power, and the questions would keep coming, but the fairies would calm him down and would explain a few things. The red fairy begins to talk, "Yo, we are the elemental fairy spirits, as you can see I'm the fire fairy spirit, Flare," the blue one would say, "I'm the water fairy spirit Agila," the brown fairy would speak up saying, "I'm the earth fairy spirit Terra." The green fairy would add on saying, "I'm the wind fairy spirit Zelena." After the introduction, Asta would have a blank stare at them. "No, the last time I checked there are 4 spirits, but they aren't fairies and they are spread out all throughout the world, so they wouldn't all be here." Terra would smile at the confused child and she somewhat impressed at the boy's knowledge. "Yep, you're right, there are 4 other elemental spirits but they came after us. See, we are the original elemental spirits, but after we found out that 4 more elemental spirits appeared, we decided to let them take over and we went into a deep sleep with the help of an earth spirit spell." "Okay? You said you guys went into a deep sleep, so why are you guys away and here?" Agila would say, "Being honest, we don't know, it seems like our mana reacted to you which woke us up." Flare would speak, "Yeah, like Agila said. Our mana reacted to you, it's like our mana chose you." "What do you mean? Your mana chose me? Why would your mana choose me? Don't I need to have the same mana attribute as you for you to choose me?" All of them would nod. "Yeah, but the thing is I don't have an attribute," Zelena would say. "Then how do you have a grimoire?" "What do you mean grimoire? I'm only 7." As he begins to move around fully as he feels something in his hand and sees that it's a 4-leaf grimoire. The grimoire color is a mix of green, blue, red, and brown. It also has gold roses all over it, cause I like roses in anime. "Well, I guess since our mana chose you, it gave you a grimoire, and I guess now we are your official spirits," stated Flare. Yeah, that's cool and all, but I still don't have an attribute. Try using one of our elements, then you should have them, because we couldn't be your spirits if you didn't," said Zelena. We cut over to Hage village as the Silva family has just arrived there, and they would see everyone there worried as they would ask what is wrong, and the father would say Asta never came back yesterday, caused the Silva family to turn pale as Noel would just burst into tear along with Aesir silently shedding tear, and the other 3 are on the verge of crying, but using all their willpower they hold them back. After getting done crying, they all go out looking for Asta, with every trying to sense his mana. 2 hours later we would see everyone return back to Hage empty handed, so thinking Asta ran away, which he did, they begin to somewhat mourn. The Silva family would begin to leave, but before they do she would ask something. Walking up to she would ask him if he wanted to become her apprentice along with Noel, and hopefully in the future they can find Asta, which would agree to, and they would set off back to the capital. 2 weeks later Asta would be seen in a random village as he would be staying there for a while. He would be walking around exploring when some thieves would begin to attack, as Asta, still being pretty kind, would try and help, but not wanting his face fully seen, he would grab an old cloak that hid himself but showed glimpses of him through the holes in the cloak. Asta would begin to one of the 5 thieves, increasing his speed with the bit of wind magic he can now control, and would hit him with a decent-sized fire punch, sending him back, causing him to slam in a tree knockout, as Asta would begin to take out the rest of the thieves, showcasing his different mana attributes before running away. But unknowing to Asta, some people caught glimpse of him and rumors began to spread about someone with 4 magic attributes taking out thieves, as news of this would make its way to a certain magic geek would his intro and excite as he would transform into a old woman before going to the village where the rumors originated from. The magic geek would get there and would begin to ask around for the person in question until he would stumble upon a person who saw a glimpse of Asta, as this person would begin to describe Asta to the best of their ability. Over to Asta, who would be sitting at a campfire just talking to his spirits, when suddenly a man with golden hair and 6-pronged star would appear. Asta and his spirits would get on guard at the man's sudden appearance but would quick have any fear swept away as the man would gain star eyes and would begin to feel over the fairies in front of him as everyone would sweat drop as Asta would speak. If you don't mind, can you tell us who you are? Oh sorry, I guess I got too carried away. My name is Julius Novacron, but people may know as the 28th Wizard King. This would cause Asta to go wide-eyed as the spirits don't know about Wizard Kings since they went to sleep before the first Wizard King came to be. If you don't mind me asking, but were you the person using more than one attribute? Asta would nod. And Julius would geek out. By the way, my name is Asta and this is Terra, Flare, Angela, and Zelena. Well, Asta would. Do you want to become my apprentice? I can't help with your mana control and any issues you have. Of course, Asta would agree, and that's the end of part 1. Part 2. We start this off as we would have a 8-year time skip. During the past 8 years, Asta has begun his training with the spirits. Since Julius is the Wizard King, he couldn't always train Asta, but whenever Julius had free time he would go and train Asta, which would piss off Marks because in his eyes Julius is sneaking out to goof off because he doesn't know about Asta. Asta has learned how to control his mana, learning things like mana skin and mana zone, and learning many spells, and even being able to somewhat control the pure mana around him to make things levitate as if he had telekinesis. Also, Julius had beg and give Asta missions to help him gain experience and also for him to get better at working as a team with his spirits. Another thing is that Asta has told his spirits about his past and what Aesir told him, so they don't like Aesir, to put it mildly. Also, I decided to change the nature of Terra's magic. Instead of it being earth magic, it's going to be nature magic. For instance, Terra can control earth, trees, and plants. Now for the Silva family and during this time they all have improved greatly. Known many more things than in canon, along with Noel and Nabra. Solid and Nozel are stronger as well, since they have a drive to find Asta and bring him back, because at this time Aesir has told and Noel what she told Asta, and at first they were disappointed, but they couldn't fully blame her because back then as children they did take part in bullying Asta, and they hate that they could be like that to the person they considered their brother. So as a family, since they consider family, they decided that they all will get stronger to bring Asta back and apologize. Another thing is that Julius has no idea what Aesir told Asta, since Asta doesn't want to cause any problems for Julius, who he sees as his big brother, so he never told him. Of course, the whole incident with Aesir left an impression on Asta, so at first Asta didn't really trust Julius or any noble, but over time, seeing how good of a person Julius is, he began to open up to him and trust him. Now I go over his spirits and their personalities. First is the water fairy spirit Angela. For Angela, she is gonna be the one who pretty much babies Asta and rarely ever gets mad unless Asta or the other fairies get hurt. Angela also taught Asta about formalities and how to present himself correctly. Next is the nature fairy spirit Terra. Terra is the smart, strategic one and is the one who trained Asta in strategy when Julius couldn't help. Next is the fire fairy spirit Flare. For Flare's personality, if any of you watched Date of Live, you'd know who Kurumi, so she would teach Asta all about flirting and how to treat a woman. Last is the wind fairy spirit Zelena. Now Zelena is going to the chill one, rarely gets mad, funny in Asta's opinion, just someone that's a genuine cool person to hang out with, and with her attribute being wind, she has the best sensing abilities, so she would train Asta in that. One more thing is that I talk about Asta's appearance. Asta looks like he does in the thumbnail, but he has longer hair. If any of you have read the beginning after the end, Asta has the same length hair as Ardor when he entered the academy, and Asta is wearing what Ardor wore as Note, but minus the sword, for now, and the mask. There are more things to go over, but I'll do that when it gets time to explain it, but now let me start the real what if. We start this off as we see a 14-year-old Asta sitting on a rock as his spirits are sleeping on his head, and we see Julius sitting beside Asta. Julius, now that you're 14 Asta and your birthday is tomorrow, you'll begin to train again with the other 4 to enter the Magic Knights. Asta, yeah I know, but I'll have to stick to one attribute in the exams to not cause suspicion, and also I have to hide these 4. Julius, so have you decided what squad will you choose, since we both know you'll get all hands raised? Asta, honestly I haven't thought about it. Julius sighing says, well I should probably get going, we wouldn't want Marks to get too angry now would? Asta, yeah well see you at the exams, sensei. After the conversation Asta would go back into his house with his spirits and we would get in his bed and drift to sleep. During Asta's sleep there would be a change in Asta's 4-leaf. A black and red aura would envelop the grimoire as a black and red 5-leaf would appear on the spine of the grimoire. The next morning Asta and his fairies would be going out on a walk as they would see a red-haired man running towards them naked, and the man would stop in front of them. Fanzel, hey kid, do you happen to have any food on you by chance? Asta reaching into his bag pulling out a sandwich. Asta, here. Fanzel, thanks kid, you're a real lifesaver, I haven't eaten in days. Asta, yeah whatever. Angela, Asta, why are you hand out food to perverts, like look at him, he butt naked. Tara, calm down Angela, there might be a reason, or at least hopefully there is one, or I'll suffocate him with nature. Fanzel, oh yeah sorry about that, I'll be right back. 5 minutes later this red-haired man would come back with clothes on. Asta, so you aren't some weird pervert, that's good, I don't feel like having to bury a body, so anyways what's your name by the way? Fanzel, my name is Fanzel, what about you kid and those flying things? Asta, I'm Asta, that's Flare pointing at Flare, that's Tara pointing at Tara, this is Angela, holding up Angela in his hand, and this one is Zelena pointing to his head, but we call her Xena for short. Fanzel, that's a lot of names, so what are they exactly? Asta, as of now that doesn't concern you. I'd say around a 2-hour time skip would occur, and they have been talking about the same things they talked about in canon, with Asta not being oblivious. Fanzel told him about him being a runaway from the Diamond Kingdom. Eventually the conversation would lead to the topic of the Magic Knights and Asta wanting to become one. Fanzel, so you're training to become a Magic Knight? Asta, yeah, I'm pretty sure that I'll make it, but I should continue training just as a precaution. Fanzel, well what is your attribute? Maybe I can help you in something. Asta thinking, well since he told me about him being from the Diamond Kingdom I guess it's only fair, plus he's already seen my spirits, so no point in hiding it, as he glances at his spirits and they would understand. Asta would go on to tell Fanzel about his spirits and that has 4 attributes in all, and he would also show him the Demon Dweller sword that he found in his grimoire. The sword is the clean version by the way. Asta, it's a pretty nice sword, but when it comes to swordsmanship I've never really trained for that. Fanzel shocked, well I could help you with that, the way I use my magic gave me years of swordsmanship experience. Asta, okay, but this sword is a bit too big for my liking, is there anywhere I can get one from somewhere? Fanzel, like I said kid, I'm not from this country, so I can't really be running around as if I were. Tara, you can leave that to me. Asta, I'll make you the best sword in existence. Asta, Tara, you know how to make swords? Tara would nod. Asta, and you ever tell me? Tara, you never asked. Asta with a deadpan stare, anyone else have something to tell me? All the spirits, no, nothing we can think of. Asta, yeah whatever. Tara, how long will it take you? Tara, around a month, as you want a real high quality sword. Asta, I'll wait, for the time being Fanzel you can stay at our house. Fanzel would nod and follow Asta to their house. For the next month Asta would begin his training with Fanzel realizing how much of a prodigy Asta truly is. We skip over to the day Tara finishes the sword. The sword would be the same sword Arthur Lewin has that he got at the auction house. Asta would begin to train with his new sword that he named Dawn's Ballad. The remainder of the 6 months would pass and the same incident that happened in canon still happened, and it would be resolved in a similar way but not completely the same. After the 6 months Asta and his spirits would part ways from Fanzel and Asta would fly to the capital. Around 3 hours later they would arrive and Asta would go to the grimoire examiner. In the line Asta would see two faces that made his blood boil, obviously being Noel and Yuno, but knowing that he can't cause a big sense and that Angela or any of the other spirits are there to calm him down, Asta would choose to ignore their existence. Minutes would pass as Yuno and Noel would enter the arena and soon Asta would walk up handing the examiner his grimoire. The examiner would shout in surprisement seeing another four-leaf. Yuno, being a seer's apprentice, would have people know who he is, and once he got his grimoire news would spread about this, so it didn't really surprise the grimoire examiner. After getting out of his surprised state, the examiner would give Asta the grimoire back, letting him enter. Inside the arena no anti-magic birds go near Asta, Yuno, or Noel, which catches people's attention. Soon the captain would enter with a seer have a glint of hope in her eyes, hoping to see Asta. Vang Ins would give the same speech, and soon after giving out brooms, everyone would begin to try and fly, and people would notice that Noel and Yuno are doing better than everyone, and people would look on in amazement until they saw someone pass both of them, and they would look up even higher to see Asta in the air without a broom. Seeing him, everyone that knew Asta in the past would have young Asta flash through their mind as they all say at the same time Asta. Asta would get a 5/5 on the flying. Next is the accuracy. Everyone would shoot their respective spells and they all would do the same in canon, with Yuno and Noel hitting bullseye, but they seemed distracted. Asta would go to shoot his spell and he says fire creation magic, fire dragon's dominance. A giant fire dragon would take form as it flies at blinding speeds toward the target. Upon impact the dragon would explode, completely destroying the target and most of the area around it. Asta would get a 5/5 to everyone's surprise. Next is the seed growing, which Asta grows his seed the biggest, getting a 5/5. The last is the fights. Yuno and Noel would go before Asta, winning their fights, and they would begin to make their way to Asta to question him, but he gets stopped. Asta, they see someone step in front of Asta challenging him, with Asta accepting. The two would enter and the exam proctor would start the fight. The fight would begin and the person in front of Asta would grow a sickening smile as he launches water spikes at Asta, with Asta dodging with no difficulty, and he would counter-strike using fire magic. Sun god's hell showers as tons of fireballs rain from the sky, hitting the water mage. After 30 seconds pass, Asta would stop the spell as everyone would see the mages knocked out with scorch marks on him. The captain's choosing would go similarly, with Yuno picking the Golden Dawn and Noel picking the Black Bulls, to everyone's surprise. Last would be Asta as he walks up looking at the captains as he would see all their hands raise, and he takes a second to think but would in the end choose the Crimson Lion Kings, to every captain's unenjoyment, especially a seer. We cut to see Asta walking around, walking into as he would get some snacks and walk out. Going to turn a corner he would see Yuno and the Silva family as he would walk past them, not even acknowledging their existence. But Yuno wouldn't allow it. Yuno, Asta, is that you? Asta coldly, nope, I've never met a. Asta, you got the wrong person. Asta would begin to walk away once more, but would have water and mercury wrap around his wrist. Asta, let go of me, I need to get back to my captain. Noel, I've known you for years now. Asta, I know you when I see you. Asta, oh shut up Noel, don't act like we have or had a bond, cause we don't. You and your mother let go of me now. As Asta would turn to them and they all would see his cold lifeless eyes, which surprises them as they would let go, and Asta would fly off heading to where Fuego Leon is at. Once there he would be greeted by Fuego Leon as they would talk for a bit, and Asta, knowing that this is his captain, he would tell Fuego Leon about his true power and his spirits as they would come